Hello, how you doing, and welcome back to the channel. Who are favourites for the Rugby World Cup later this year? That's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Is it Ireland on the back of a Grand Slam? Is it France because they're at home? Or could it be the traditional superpowers of the All Blacks or the Springboks? That's what I'm going to be getting into. I'm going to be looking at each team and going through a case for each side really, and kind of the question marks around them, but also why they should be considered as one of the favourites for the World Cup. Make sure you have your say down below. Drop it in the comments. Who do you think at this moment in time should be the favourites for the World Cup in France later this year? Also, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And all right, let's get into it. So for me, at this moment in time, the teams that are worthy of being in the discussion for who could be favourites for the World Cup is Ireland and France for obvious reasons. They're the number one and number two teams in the world, and they were the first and second in the Six Nations. And then New Zealand and South Africa. And it's difficult really when it comes to the Southern Hemisphere sides because we haven't seen them play yet this year. But off the back of what we saw last year, I think it's obviously the All Blacks and the Springboks. We will wait and see what happens with Eddie Jones and Australia. As we know from his time as England, he can have a real immediate impact straight away, but I still think it would be quite a tall order for Australia to be World Cup contenders. So those are the four teams I'm going to be talking about. The final caveat with this is they're all on the same side of the draw. So two of these teams will not be making a semi-final, which is utterly ridiculous. I've spoken about that on the channel before, of when World Rugby does the draw for the World Cup. But even so, I think at this moment in time, it is likely World Cup champions come out of one of those four teams. So let's get straight into it. I'm going to start with Ireland. They are the Grand Slam, the Six Nations champions. I've been consistent on this channel. I said it before the Six Nations that Ireland would be the team to win it. And throughout the Six Nations, I said that they just look so good. And I do think they are one of the best Grand Slam winning teams we have seen. I think they are probably the best Grand Slam winning team I think we've seen since England in 2003. Some people might say that France last year in 2022 were exceptional as well, and they were. But I just think there's something different about this Ireland side. But as all the Springbok and all the All Black fans will be quick to point out in the comments, Ireland have never won a knockout game at a World Cup. Is that such a big hurdle that they could come unstuck? Personally, I don't think it is, for one simple reason, in that this is an Irish side now who, first of all, they've got themselves to the number one ranked team in the world. They have comprehensively won a Six Nations. They've beaten everyone that's come before them at home in Australia and South Africa. And perhaps most importantly, they've won a 3-test series against New Zealand away in New Zealand. I think that will give them a huge amount of confidence. I always remember Martin Johnson and Sir Clive Woodward and the kind of legends of that England team in 2003 speaking about the confidence they got from beating Australia, it was, and the All Blacks in those days, the confidence they got from beating them away from home. And I just think this Ireland side, the fact that they haven't done well at previous World Cups and have kind of come unstuck, I don't think that's going to be some sort of mental block or mental hurdle that they're not able to get over. I think if they do end up getting knocked out of this World Cup, I think it will be because they come up against another exceptionally good side, rather than them not being mentally capable of winning a game in knockout rugby. The final thing as well, in terms of Ireland, is really the fitness of Johnny Sexton. He is injured after that final game against England in the Six Nations. As far as I understand it, I don't think it's going to be terminal that he won't make it to the World Cup, but he is so key to them. And Ireland, on the one hand, have proven that they have the strength in depth now. We saw it in the Six Nations with Tadhg Beirne, Ian Henderson, Gary Ringrose, probably some other guys I'm forgetting. They didn't have Tadhg Furlong at the start of the tournament, Jamison Gibson Park. They've proven that they do have the strength in depth to compete there, but I just wonder when it comes to those really big knockout games, they still need Johnny Sexton at fly half. So his fitness, I think, would be a concern. But overall, Ireland, of course they're in this conversation. Next up, I want to talk about France, because for all the plaudits I've just given to Ireland, and deservedly so, my big question really for this World Cup is who can beat France in France? That completely changes the dynamic, in my opinion. In the Six Nations, I think ultimately Ireland won the Six Nations, not entirely, but in part because they had France at home. And actually, had they played France in round two in Paris, I still think they would have won, because I think at that moment in time, Ireland were playing better than France. As simple as that. France got better later on in the tournament. But I do question who can beat France, given that I think France will start to return to their best. We saw it towards the end of the Six Nations. I know South Africa came close last year, actually, and were pretty upset with the officiating in that game. But I do expect France to continue to improve. And given just where rugby is in France at the moment, they have been building towards this for a long, long time. The French public are going to be so behind this team. I just wonder whether there could be this kind of momentum, this wave of French momentum that takes them through to winning that World Cup. Almost similar to what we saw with the football in '98 when they won their first Football World Cup. I just think this is a huge, huge tournament for the French. And then I guess the other point I wanted to make is more of a tactical one, which is how tight and tactical knockout games can be and how important kicking is in modern rugby. France at this moment in time are the best counter-attacking team in the world. And I think the stats back that up. I just wonder whether their style of play is suited to some of the more kind of arm wrestle type games we might see in the knockout stages of a World Cup. And similarly to Ireland, they've beaten everyone, haven't they? They've beaten New Zealand at home. They've beaten South Africa, as I say already. They beat Ireland in the 2022 Six Nations. So I think France will be pretty raring to go in terms of a home World Cup. And yeah, just let me know what you think. Who can beat France in France? That's kind of the big question that I'm wrestling with. Let's get on to the Southern Hemisphere sides, though. New Zealand, first of all, had a weird 2022, I thought. They lost to Ireland, and Ireland were very, very good, although New Zealand won the first test of that series pretty comprehensively. They then ended up winning the Rugby Championship. They had an unbeaten tour of the North to end their year, even though they ended up drawing with England in that game at Twickenham, which is a pretty average England side, really. I think we've seen before and since that this England side isn't that good. They gave up a pretty big lead to them to draw at Twickenham. And I guess the big question mark really is Ian Foster good enough? And I still think a lot of All Blacks fans aren't certain about him at all. I think many people would have liked to see him probably depart from the job last year and Scott Robertson maybe come in then rather than after the World Cup in France. So I think there are possibly more question marks over this All Blacks team heading into a World Cup year than there have been since, I'm trying to think, 2011 maybe? I don't know, maybe even before that, possibly 2007. New Zealand always come into the World Cup as pretty heavy favourites a lot of the time. I think 2007, if I remember correctly, and Springbok fans will be able to point me out if I'm wrong, I remember South Africa kind of being the favourites for that tournament, really. New Zealand were obviously there, they were obviously spoken about. So South Africa obviously winning it then. 2011, yeah, I think it's a long time since New Zealand really are comfortable favourites. And so maybe they're not quite at the top of this list at the moment when it comes to who are World Cup favourites. The reason I think they're there is because they had a great end to last year. They also have brilliant players. You look at some of the game breakers and game changers they have in that team, and it's the All Blacks. You know, they've won World Cups before. They've been there. They've done it. There is an expectation of excellence. Almost, I would liken it to any of you that are football fans of kind of Real Madrid in the Champions League. It almost doesn't matter how good they are that particular year. It's the Champions League and they're Real Madrid. And they're so synonymous with that they are worthy of the conversation of who could win it. That's how I kind of feel about the All Blacks, even though at the moment, yeah, maybe I'm not quite edging towards them as much as I am some of the other teams. Let me finish up with the Springboks, because the big question really for me when it comes to Springboks is, can they keep adding to their game? And we saw it towards the end of last year when they beat England at Twickenham, that yes, they have this utterly dominant scrum. It'll be a world-class scrum, we know that. Yes, they can be really physical. Yes, they can be good defensively. But can they add to the more attacking elements of their game? And we started to see them do that at Twickenham at the end of last year. It's something Jacques Nienaber and those coaches have spoken about and have targeted, of adding more layers to the game. And all of a sudden, if we do get a Springbok team that can do more than simply kick, be really defensive and have a great set piece, if they can have more attacking elements, that is an incredibly tough team to beat, particularly in a knockout stage of a World Cup, I think. In terms of personnel around this, is Marnie Libok the 10? Is he going to be the fly half for South Africa moving forward? He's more of a a running fly half rather than perhaps the tactics of Andre Pollard. Andre Pollard, by the way, I'm sure many South African fans will be aware of this, been playing really well for Leicester Tigers over the last month or so over here in the Northern Hemisphere. So maybe Pollard does come back in, but could it be Libbok? I'd quite like to see him come in and run that attack for the Springboks, but we shall wait and see. I'm fascinated by the Rugby Championship because it's World Cup year. I honestly cannot wait to watch those games and start doing videos on those games. And just remember with South Africa, they worked out a way for 2019 to peak in time for that World Cup final. It's still pretty much the same coaches, pretty much the same players. Can they do that again in 2023? I think they genuinely could do. I don't know if I'd quite have them favourites at the moment, but I think they have the possibility to. So look, who are World Cup favourites right now? I think right now it's between Ireland and France, simply because we haven't seen the Rugby Championship teams play yet. I think who can beat France in France? And Ireland are the Grand Slam champions. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm sitting on the fence a little bit here, partly because, look, we haven't seen the All Blacks, we haven't seen the Springboks. But let me know what you think. Who are the World Cup favourites right now? Also subscribe to the channel and like the video. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.